we're going to take a look, or at least attempt to take a look, at what kind of drove the man. In other words, what was at back of that worldview? What kind of faith was there? Lincoln, after all, is often seen or claimed as a Christian by some, or seen as a violent atheist by others. It kind of depends on what you want him to be. So let's take a look at him as best we can. Now, the first thing I have to tell you is, as far as Lincoln's faith goes, it's pretty debatable. The information and the evidence that we have to this day shows us a lot of different issues of him. One of the first things that we know about him is that he probably was a skeptic, someone who really didn't think that Christianity necessarily had the right course of things or really was the absolute truth. In other words, the whole claim that Jesus Christ is the only way to heaven just seemed like too much of bigotry, I would say, to Lincoln. And so in 1834, according to some witnesses who knew Lincoln back at the time, they say that he actually wrote a manuscript against Christianity, but later burned this manuscript. Now, the problem with this evidence is it's entirely hearsay or based on witnesses, but the thing about history, almost all of history comes down to us based upon what witnesses say actually happened. Another curious event happened in 1846 when he was running for Congress. It was in that year that he attended one of those famous revivals out there in the West in Illinois. And it was at this revival of a pastor by the name of Peter Cartwright that the pastor would make everyone stand up who wanted to go to heaven, which I would assume would be everyone, and then said, all right, now if you want to go to hell, it's your turn to stand up. And the whole idea was nobody was going to stand up for that unless they were, I don't know, just wanting to have a good time maybe or make fun of the pastor. But still, the idea was nobody stood up. But Lincoln didn't stand up either time. And Lincoln was a public figure. He was running for political office. And so Peter Cartwright said to him, Mr. Lincoln, you have not expressed an interest in either going to heaven or hell. May I inquire as to where you do plan to go? And Lincoln said, I did not come here with the idea of being singled out, but since you ask, I will reply with equal candor. I intend to go to Congress. And he did. It shows you Lincoln's great wit at a moment when he was put on the spot. But in terms of the Christian faith, Lincoln has left us some clues about what he believed. For example, consider this letter from him written to Judge John A. Wakefield, who was a Kansas abolitionist. My earlier views of the unsoundness of the Christian scheme of salvation and the human origin of the Scriptures have become clearer and stronger with advancing years, and I see no reason for thinking I shall ever change them. Or, for example, we have this. This was quoted by his friend Newton Bateman, who was the superintendent of public instruction for the state of Illinois. He said this, according to Mr. Bateman, Mr. Bateman, I am not a Christian. God knows I would be one, but I have carefully read the Bible, and I do not understand this book. Yet what we know about Lincoln is at some point, particularly with the deaths of two of his sons, one of which was in the White House, he began to have a change of heart. In fact, his wife, Mary Todd, had this view of him. She said, a man who never took the name of the Maker in vain, who always read his Bible diligently, who never failed to rely on God's promises and looked upon him for protection, surely such a man as this could not have been a disbeliever or any other than what he was, a true Christian gentleman. From the time of the death of our little Edward, I believe my husband's heart was directed towards religion, and as time passed on, when Mr. Lincoln became elevated to office, then indeed, to my knowledge, did his great heart go up daily, hourly, in prayer to God for his sustaining power. When, too, the overwhelming sorrow came upon us, our beautiful, bright, angelic boy, Willie, was called away from us to his heavenly home, with God's chastising hand upon us, he turned his heart to Christ. One clear thing we do know about Lincoln, especially at something like the Gettysburg Address, is you begin to see a man who's beginning to question whether or not union with such a firm iron hand is actually worth it. And it's incredible. Towards the end of his life, he had this to say about the Civil War, which I would argue really shows him surrendering to a sovereign will. Let me read to you this quote. This is by Lincoln himself. The will of God prevails. In great contest, each party claims to act in accordance with the will of God. Both may be, but one must be wrong. God cannot be for and against the same thing at the same time. In the present Civil War, it is quite possible that God's purpose is something different from the purpose of either party. And yet the human instrumentalities, working just as they do, are of the best adaptation to effect his purpose. I am almost ready to say that this is probably true, that God wills this contest and wills that it shall not end yet. By his mere great power, on the minds of the now contestants, he could have either saved or destroyed the Union without a human contest. Yet the contest began, and having begun, he could have the final victory to either side any day, yet the contest proceeds. In other words, Lincoln was willing to realize he believed he had justice on his side, but he also believed that he might be misunderstanding how justice actually applied. And the same could be said for the South. It's a remarkable work in that quote right there, that he's able to admit that often us who look at things through a sinful lens really don't have it completely correct. And so Lincoln, warts and all, and also Honest Abe, really got it right there at the end.